Great. Well, this is going to be a really exciting panel, and I'm very excited to speak to this group of entrepreneurs and investors about AI. The title, of course, is Looking into the Future, Glimpsing the Future. So we're talking about where AI might take us, how we might get there, but also I think we have to address the elephant in the room, which is fear right now. There's a lot of fear in AI. There's fear of missing out if you're a government or a country, but there's also fear that we've overspent. And we just saw overnight the NASDAQ fell by about 2%, I think, and there was a bit of a sell-off, even after NVIDIA released some pretty impressive results. So, of course, this is all about talk of the bubble. We're going to talk about the future, but let's talk about where we are right now and address this. Let's start with Matthew. You spent a lot of time at McKinsey on machine learning, and now you're CEO of Invisible Technology. So this is your bread and butter, working with companies to integrate large language models. Are they really struggling that much to integrate these systems? Because the big concern is all the money being spent isn't resulting in revenues for the end customers.
Yeah, so I think this is a question of adoption. I think you can look at bubble terminology as around adoption and the technology itself, and then valuations. And I'll focus on the first one because Sakana and others can focus on the second one. I think if you look at adoption today, it's really a split between consumer and enterprise adoption. So consumer adoption has been the fastest growing technology evolution in history, probably 65% of, there's a study recently across 50 countries, 65% of consumers use Gen AI on a monthly basis now. So the technology adoption on the consumer paradigm side has been massive. I think enterprise is going to take longer than people had expected. And so I think if you look at, the automobile took 40 years for mass adoption. There's a study that came out recently from MIT that 5% of models today are making it to production on the enterprise side.
That everybody's been talking about that study.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that is a realistic context. So 70% of the software in the US, for example, is over 20 years old. You have a lot of legacy systems, fragmented data, and the process of actually working through all of that to adopt Gen AI, you need clean data, you need to redesign and re-architect workflows, and you need to actually have line adoption and leadership of these initiatives. And that's going to take a little bit longer than people expected. So I think the adoption curve will be very material over the next 5 years. And I think the consumer adoption has already been massive. I do think the enterprise, the reality of it is a little bit slower than people originally expected.
It's just, so the money will come in, it's just going to take longer. Anna, you have a theory on this, right?
I think that with regards to the AI bubble, I think that it will ultimately follow a Mayor's law, which is humans tend to have this type of expectation about technology. And in reality, we'll kind of go through periods of overestimating and underestimating the market. And I think some of what we saw last night is sort of, I wouldn't call it a hype around AGI, but I think 3 years ago when ChatGPT came out, I think people had, magical expectations of AGI that are coming soon. And I think we're gradually being brought to a reality where we're thinking about what is the quality of revenue. What is the actual retention rate and gross margin, and not just growth, right? And I think we're thinking about, is this a finite game? Is this a winner takes all or zero-sum game? And I think we're seeing that, I think for consumers, you're not going to spend endless money on AI. You might have a budget of, say, $100 a month, and what are you going to spend that on? Like $20 for ChatGPT, and what's the rest going to? So I think people are actually fighting for that budget. So it's the realities, and I think healthy, but I think over time, things will follow Mayor's law, and I think over to say 10 or 100 years, I think we'll gradually underestimate the technology that is AI.
But nobody seems to be disputing that the consumer demand is high. I mean, 800 million people are using ChatGPT every week. I guess the question is that $100 budget would be so much bigger for enterprises, and that's where the hope is that the revenue will come. And presumably, you are comfortable to say that's going to happen.
I think so. Yeah.
Okay. David, I have to bring this up. You guys announced your Series B fundraise on Monday, and when you announced it to your staff, this fundraising round that made you the highest valued private company in Japan, you actually brought up the AI bubble and said, you know what, actually there's maybe a bit too much money being poured in, which is ironic because you're an AI company. So explain that dissonance.
Yeah, I mean, when we announced our Series B fundraise, I guess we raised the money already, so we can actually address the elephant in the room.
Yeah.
But I think, there's a lot of talk about over-investments in AI. I think a lot of the current AI paradigm is based on scaling, building larger and larger models, requiring larger infrastructure. But our company, the way we're working on R&D is based on innovation, based on constraints. And I think what we're seeing in AI development is countries like Japan, countries like China, with less resources, are coming up with more novel ideas, even with the help of AI. I think that with regards to over-investments, ultimately a lot of the investments leads to infrastructure, energy, power grid, which will ultimately be useful after the inevitable repricing of the market. But however, my concerns are what technologies are going to be left behind. Are the current GPU architecture is going to be used for the next use cases? I think some people are saying we're in an LLM bubble, not necessarily an AI bubble.
Right.
I think that has some element of truth in it. With what this gentleman is saying, it is true that only 5% of the use cases now succeed in enterprises. But at the same time, the enterprise sector is the sector that I'm actually most excited and passionate about. And ultimately, I think that might be the sector to bring in revenue for the industry. We have $20 subscriptions to ChatGPT. I think we're having great user adoption. And what our company is trying to do is to help Japan, which is going through one of the largest digital transformation exercises in its history, help with their enterprises adopt with this new technology, making sure that this 5% goes up to 50%, 70%, 80% in order to increase the productivity for Japanese enterprises. And this is where I think working with generative AI, workflows, customized model developments, and even using AI itself. Like our company developed a technology called the AI scientist that can actually come up with new, more efficient AI algorithms to make things go faster. These AI-driven innovations, it's going to be, we're just seeing the start of using AI for innovation itself. I think I said this on Bloomberg before. Right now, I think we're in the mainframe era of large language models. I think eventually, in the next 5-10 years, what fits on a data center would likely fit on a personal computer on a phone. So I'm actually quite excited about the next 5-10 years. And I think the less focus we have on large scale, the development, scaling higher, and more on innovation. This is something that I want to see.
And around the issue of around efficiency and perhaps smaller models. That was a really interesting point you made earlier about a possible large language model bubble, not just an AI bubble. And that's a nice way to segue to you, Nathan, because your company, you're a hardware company, and Plaud, and you're building potentially models that aren't based on scraping text off the internet. But I know you're not doing this now, but in the future, you could perhaps build AI that is based on data picked up from the world around us, the physical world, the so-called world models that Yann LeCun of Meta, who just left Meta, has been advocating for some time. Maybe you could just start by telling us about this device you're wearing on your lapel right now.
Yeah, so this is the Plaud Note pin, and also I have the Plaud Note at the back of a smartphone here. So we at Plaud has been developing the AI note-taking devices that are targeted to become the most trusted work companion for professionals. And we have shipped close to 1.5 million devices to users globally. And well, I think some of the use cases can really tell the story about how are we collecting an entirely new data set by serving these physical use cases. For example, every human being would be, let's say, using kind of an AI note-taking solution on Zoom or Google Meet, et cetera, et cetera. But think about real-life conversations, right? We talk to people around us, and we at Plaud has a philosophy where conversation is a form of intelligence, and that means, it's best that if we're able to capture all those meaningful conversations. But guess what? For in-person meetings and conversations, people are not doing that. So what happens if we're able to achieve that? Let's say with the real estate agents, right? The primary of their job is to take the clients for house visits. And their success entirely depends on if they're able to land a successful deal during that house visit. It's the same for the vets, taking care of your dogs and doing the surgery, etc. And they will be talking to the patients or the dog's parents about how the dog is, with this illness and treatment plans, etc. Guess what? All this data set has never been captured before.
Yeah.
It was not captured, it was not trained. Apparently, it was also not able to be utilized. So at Plaud,
Just real-world conversations
Yeah.
between a person with their real estate agent, a person with a vet and their patients,
Yeah,
these
that's
kinds
right,
of conversations. Okay.
Yeah. So in the end, I think, we by equipping humans with the sensors, we would be able to have potentially 10x or 100x of the data set that we're able to create.
So
that
10
the models-
times the amount of text that large language models already get from the entirety of the internet, you could get that from recorded conversations.
I think that's kind of a very modest assumption.
So it'd be more than that.
Yeah, apparently yes.
And the result would be a much more capable large language model, or?
Yeah, for sure. Like all these user scenarios, they have never been trained before with all these use cases, right? Like, how would people describe a car? Like which specific model? How would people describe a illness? How would people describe a house? All these have not been kind of well documented before. So yeah, the sensors matter a lot here.
So this kind of, because the panel is about, the title of this panel is Glimpsing the Future, we have to talk about the future. And Silicon Valley is obsessed with artificial general intelligence, this theoretical threshold where AI systems become smarter than humans and more capable. How much does this really matter to your businesses, though? Maybe David, do you have any thoughts on that?
I think the rest of the world living outside of Silicon Valley, we kind of have a different view on AGI.
Which is, do you care?
Yeah, I mean, I think, especially in Asia, we're in Singapore right now. I think Asian society more believe in a collective type of civilization, collective type of intelligence. And in my view, our intelligence as human species, we are a collective intelligence. We are not like it's individual big brains. We're like, billions of brains networked together.
Yeah.
And we share this common know-how, understanding, and move things forward. So we're also one of the most adaptive species ever. So my view is AI is ultimately going to be a normal technology. So in 20 years, our kids will just be using a chatbot like it's a fax machine. It won't be magical anymore. And all of this will just be integrated and adapt with our civilization. And even with regards to LLMs integrating into our workflow or AI, I think a lot of our know-how, this resonates with what you're talking about earlier as well, is not written in a rule book. A lot of our work and our workflows, they're based on human-to-human interaction, our kind of structure and trust with each other and our colleagues. And for the machine to just suddenly try to replace all of these hierarchy, all of these systems in a large traditional company or even a government, it's actually really difficult. So I think it's going to take a lot of time for this technology to be integrated. And once it's integrated, I think it's our society, as we're kind of like a domesticated, self-domesticated species. We'll just essentially integrate this into this broader human civilization and move forward.
Okay.
So it's not that exciting, not as like a sci-fi type of view.
Oh, I'm all for sci-fi. No, let's bring it on. If we're talking about the future, we have to talk about China, of course. And there's so much exciting work going on in China in AI. Anna, you are writing some of the first checks for new AI companies coming out of China. You've backed Manus and Kimi. And these are young founders. So it's like a new generation of founders coming out of China. What are you noticing about them that makes them distinctive and perhaps different to the previous generation of very successful founders to come out of China behind Alibaba and Baidu and so forth?
We're seeing a lot of the founders we're funding today are in their 20s or early 30s. Half of them are under 25. They were born post-2000. They're much more global than the previous generation in that I think there was less information gap when they were growing up. They grew up during the internet age. If you were from a small town in China, you had access to information not only about what's going on in Beijing and Shanghai, but about around the rest of the world and using global products. So I think one question is AI sort of more borderless than people think? The US is always talking about this US-China AI race. I hear it a lot less in China, to be honest, where maybe it's partly because it's a catch-up game, but it's not a term that is widely used in my experience. And I think the founders are thinking about building the best products for any user. So I think in that way, sort of AI is borderless to a lot of Chinese founders.
And it does seem that China has caught up significantly in terms of the capabilities of their AI models, and a lot of people attribute that to open source models that are coming from China. So, these companies don't have to start from scratch; they build on each other. Matthew, you're dealing with a lot of Western companies who are integrating LLMs, and I'm curious about how popular these Chinese models are. There was a very interesting stat that came out from a partner at Andreessen Horowitz, the venture capital firm from Silicon Valley, who said 80% of the startups in Silicon Valley who are pitching to them now are using Chinese AI models. So maybe that's just distinctive to tech startups, but it does seem to be gaining momentum.
I do think it's unique to Western tech startups. So I think we see a lot of adoption of the open source models in the tech community for earlier stage companies. I think enterprise, to your earlier question on AGI, I think the enterprise is focused on a very different thing. So I think there's generalized intelligence, which is what a lot of the current discussion is around publicly, but the enterprise is focused on reliability, extreme precision, testing the observability, and so cybersecurity, all the main things you'd expect large companies to be focused on. And so actually the enterprise adoption cycle, I think, has been very different. It's focused on how do I get my structured and structured data together in an organized way? How do I redesign a workflow with human loops and make sure that I have governance of that workflow? And then most importantly, how do I do governance testing, adversarial testing, red teaming to make sure that what I expose to consumers is really good? I think one of the, you've seen some really interesting public examples. I mean, just one recently. Cadillac released a chatbot as an example to the public that a young kid actually had a conversation with the agent and got it to sell him a $70,000 car for $1 by saying, we're friends, so no takesies, no backsies if we agree on something, and the chatbot agreed to that. And so all of that testing, validation, guardrailing is what the enterprise is focused on. So I actually think it is a real bifurcation. I mean, to give you rough stats, the Y Combinator class, this recent one, has the largest revenue by double of any startup class in the last decade.
The largest revenue?
By double. So they're basically double the aggregate revenue of any other class Y Combinator's had.
Wow.
And they're adopting this technology at a very different pace. I think the enterprise is a very different paradigm, which is much more about security, testing.
Yeah.
And so I don't think you're going to see mass open source adoption in enterprise. In fact, enterprise has rarely adopted open source at all in the last decade. I think you'll see a lot more focus on validated and tested models. And I do think it will happen over the next 5 years, but it won't be now.
Actually, I want to add to that point, because the 80% actually, I think, is a bit of a myth in that I think that's within open source models, but actually, I think 80% are actually closed source models. So it would actually be 16% that are using Chinese open sourced.
Oh, wow.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, right. I'm wondering if any of you have thoughts on the point I made earlier about open source in China, whether that is the reason or part of the reason why AI companies caught up so quickly. Is it because of that, or what is it? How has China moved so quickly? And that's to anybody here. Yeah.
As a company in Japan, I actually focus a lot about the development of open source AI in China due to the proximity. And I think we're witnessing this great amount of innovation. I think open source is the way the rest of the world can work together, not just in China, to develop this technology and catch up. It's also, to my point earlier, about limited resources. Like when you don't have like hundreds of billions of dollars of funding, you actually you're forced to work together in a collaborative way to develop the technology.
So constraint breeds innovation?
Innovation,
okay.
yeah. And I think there's a lot of talk, especially in this geopolitical environment, there's a lot of talk about China, open source models, US closed model. What I want to see is open source is open source, closed is closed. And there's room for it in any country. Like Linux is an open source project. No one says like Linux is like this Finnish, in Finland-based open project. It's a global project. So I think the DeepSeek or QN or Llama, they're just open source models, and ultimately the world will treat them as open source model. They can build, proprietary systems can be built on it, things can be done more collaboratively, and we're seeing US companies, especially AI coding companies, using DeepSeek models, they fine-tune them on their own data flywheel to make things more efficient. And I think this is just going to continue. You can't really stop the open source movements in history.
Although it's interesting that Meta, Llama has been quite successful for them, but Mark Zuckerberg started the Superintelligence Labs, and he has said that they will probably go more closed source and maybe move away from the open source ambitions they had before.
It's a shame. I mean, Llama 3 is still one of the best open source language models out there. And
although Llama 4 was a little bit of a flop.
I didn't want to comment on it, but we use Llama 3 quite extensively in our company.
There is a Llama 4, and they're not using it, so take from that what you will. Nathan, any thoughts on sort of the differences between China and the US in terms of AI development?
Well, because we are working on, I wouldn't call Plaud a hardware company. Actually, we define ourselves as an AI company.
Yeah.
But as a matter of fact, we try to build the solutions. Like we internally define a company that we are working on building the next generation of intelligence infrastructure and interface for people to capture, extract, and utilize intelligence from what they say, hear, see, and even think. So by saying that, we can think about, most of the AI companies today, they are working on how they're able to leverage the already digitized intelligence on the internet. But again, if you think about how AI would be able to help human beings to get things done, by having the contextual context where the conversations are happening, the visual, the visual intelligence is happening. How are we able to capture that? So that's why we are trying to combine the best strengths in the both worlds, right? We have the best engineers in Shenzhen working on the hardware design, engineer and manufacturing. We also have the best engineers in San Francisco working on the AI models, on the cloud infrastructure, etc. So in the end, if we would truly have 10 billion robots, or every single human being would have a chief of staff or kind of AI work companion concept helping us get things done, I would see it has to have the best of the both worlds. Like China is leading on every element of the hardware piece, which is and
thanks
like
in large part, presumably, to China's long-term manufacturing prowess over there.
That's right. Yeah, and apparently, most of the AI companies today still rely on the most advanced models that the Silicon Valley has been creating. So, I genuinely think if we're talking about AI is so powerful, right? In the next 10 years, we are going to have abundance with physical goods. 90% of the people wouldn't need to work. This is what Elon Musk talked about. If we're embracing a world that's so affluent, so why would we try to compete with each other and so this is we're adversary countries, and it doesn't make much sense in a way.
Do the rest of the panel agree with the latest comments from Elon Musk that the path to ending poverty and creating wealth for everyone on Earth will be through AI and robotics?
I think I'd say two things. I think the narrative around the workforce changes are overstated, and I actually think if you look at every technology for the last 100 years, any advanced technology has led to changes in how we work. But whether it was moving from an agricultural economy to a manufacturing economy to a service economy, I actually think the human in the loop is a core function of how the next 20 years will play out in all of these different sectors. And I actually think many of the positive trends are very different than what's being talked about. So just to give 3 examples, energy, there's a lot of discussion around data centers. Is that a negative thing? But if you actually look at the composition of electricity in the world, data centers are only about 1% of global electricity, and AI data centers are 0.25 to 0.5% of that. So you have very little actual negative energy usage. Flip side, 14 to 20% of global electricity is air conditioning and cooling. So this is why the World Economic Forum just came out and said if you actually look at the net carbon impact of all this, it's actually going to be massively positive. We're not having that discussed. You take healthcare, totally different space, but the U.S. as an example spends $14,000 per capita in healthcare cost, which is about 2.5 to 3x what Germany and Canada pay. And then if you think about care outcomes, Johns Hopkins just came out and said, You can see them at like about 250,000 lives a year could be saved from better monitoring of procedures, 20% improvement in breast cancer outcomes. The amount of both quality of care and waste outcome improvement you can see in healthcare material. And you know, the final one I'll go with is actually one of the ones I focus on the most is core infrastructure, like physical infrastructure. And you think about permitting timelines for that and actual management of those processes. There was an OECD study that just came out that they think AI can help speed up permitting and project management timelines for government contracts by 50 to 70%. So imagine if you actually could take all the money in society that's being poured into healthcare, into core infrastructure, and into energy and actually optimize it. I think that has huge positive implications for society. And the way that those are deployed will be different, but I actually think you'll have way more infrastructure and construction as a result of AI, as an example.
Okay. David, please.
I don't agree with Elon on the
You don't agree with Elon.
abundance and over, you know, like the statement where AI can just do all of our jobs and we can just stay at home and like watch TV. I think
Live in the
humans,
dream.
like we're hardworking. We want to work.
Yeah,
and
I agree
think
too.
with this new technology, like there's always some use cases that it can't do, like because it's just wired differently than our own societal intelligence. And I think as we have more productivity, we're actually just going to work harder, like, unfortunately. So I think, like, you know, especially in both US and China, people will still continue to work harder. And this kind of competition will probably still remain. That's kind of my view.
What's the vibe you get from the startups that you're backing in China, Anna? Are they trying to build AGI, or are they trying to solve the climate crisis or end poverty in the way, I mean, some tech companies in Silicon Valley, their modus operandi is let's build AGI so we can solve the world's most intractable human problems. Why are people building AI in China?
I think that everyone's a little more practical in terms of the information. I have this list of neo labs that were just started. You have a lot of big visions, and that's what's great about Silicon Valley. In China, I'm seeing sort of more different verticals popping up right now, which is kind of interesting. So, you know, Dan Wang wrote this book, Breakneck, and it talks about US being a legal society and China being an engineering society. And I think one thing that I observed is, you know, Harvey and Lagora are the rock stars in the legal industry, for example. That
And
probably
just briefly say what Harvey and Lagora
Harvey and Lagora are the top AI law apps.
Got it.
In the US and Europe. And in China, I don't know that we're going to see a sector like that, but we'll see, like, for example, one of our portfolio companies, Black Lake, which works with a lot of factories in China, we'll see kind of manufacturing 2.0 in that they have all the factory data.
Yeah.
And so they're coming up with their own sort of small model and vertical that's built around AI for factories, right? And we have a company called AI EDU that's doing sort of a full stack education app. So you might see different verticals coming up in China, which I think will be super interesting to watch. And even within AGI, if you look at robotics, I mean, the hottest company in robotics in China is Unitree, which is hardware, right? I mean, it has good software, but it's known for its hardware. And one could argue is hardware or software more important in robotics, but you'll see kind of different things popping up, yeah.
Particularly in manufacturing. Okay, quick fire round question to everybody on the panel. What is the AI breakthrough that you're most excited to see in the next 5 years? Anyone want to start?
You go.
No, as I mentioned earlier, I think that in the next 5 years, we're going to see AI used in a lot of discovery, innovation. I think there's going to be a lot of use cases in AI for scientific discovery, drug discovery, and even discovering new AI algorithms themselves. And I think that's going to be a big transformative change in the next 5 years.
Okay. Matthew?
Yeah, so I actually think the technology today is capable of doing the vast majority of things you need in the enterprise and public sector. The biggest obstacle to that has been the kind of layers of sediment of old legacy technology. So the 70% of software in the world that's over 20 years old. And so I think the thing I'm most excited about is I do think Gen AI is the process by which we can modernize existing legacy architectures, do all the documentation, understand how to take older systems and bring them to new. And I think that will, if you take certain societies that have 30 to 40-year-old mainframe systems as all their foundations, what will allow them to move faster and address all these real-world needs is actually legacy architecture modernization.
So the breakthrough will just be making it work for business.
It's literally, it's not the fancy stuff, it's just the basic foundations and resetting those so you can build on modern architecture.
Okay. Anna?
I think one that's not talked about a lot is voice agents.
Okay.
We have one that's launched this week called typeless.com, and I think just the change in potential human-computer interaction through voice is something to watch for the next 5
Particularly in
years.
customer service, is that?
Customers is being one, and Plaud is another example of voice, but this is really using voice as a dictation instead of typing.
Yeah.
That's changing your human interaction.
Very cool. And Nathan?
Well, I'm actually hoping, let's say the sensory technology can advance quite a lot so that, AI can be utilized. If you think about, in my assumption, every single human being is going to be equipped with a wearable AI device in the next 10 years. That means
We're all going to
billions.
be wearing these devices.
That's right. So
Okay.
what's stopping us from getting there right now is, let's say the batteries, they are still not able to have the battery life that's required to support all these functionalities. And also like the cameras, they consume us too much battery life, and also like the connectivity module, they might not run as fast as we wish, stuff like that. So actually like the physical limitations have been like stopping us from benefiting the most from the most advanced models. So I hope that could be the breakthrough for the next 5 years. And we're also trying to experiment on that.
Your experiment. Okay, so
Yeah.
look to what Nathan's company is doing at Plaud on battery technology and sensory technology.
Sure.
Well, thanks so much to our panel for these wonderful discussion, and thank you very much to our audience for listening. Thanks very much.